Well, welcome, Lalith. I'm so glad to have you here tonight, and actually on an inaugural podcast because this is will be the first podcast for what we're going to continue on and call the Business of Isness podcast. And I'll just explain. Basically, I think you have a good idea of what isness is as far as a consciousness level, but what I want to look at is that whole idea of self-inquiry and introspection and looking within. And I think that that's where a lot of what you've done comes in. And what I'd like to be doing with the Business of Isness is bring a spiritual aspect to the business or the corporate world or business in general, because we all know, we all know about a profit and loss statement, right? We all know about what's the bottom line, So with the Business of Isness, I'd like to take that and take a look at, for people to be able to examine what their bottom line is, what are their assets? What do they perceive as their liabilities in life? And what at the end of the day is their bottom line? What do they see as maybe not a monetary bottom line, but what can they give back to the world? So welcome. And first of all, I want to thank you for the article that you had written in the latest issue of the magazine. And for all transparency, I mean, I want to make people aware that I think I've known you now for about 5 years, right? And it's and then just recently I've learned a lot about all of the business aspects that what you've been doing, and maybe you can share with our listeners. So
thank you, Malcolm. It's such a pleasure, and it's really an honor to be here with you on your inaugural podcast. That's amazing. So that means I have to also kind of set the tone, set the stage, right? Which is a beautiful thing, and you have given me that honor to do so. So let's start talking about some of the kind of the background of where I come from. I come from a world of science and technology, engineering, so that informs me with a lot of things I do. However, luckily, before I got to that learning of science, I was taught mindfulness meditation. I was taught some Buddhist principles, which was about inquiring into the mind, inquiring into the nature of life, the nature of our mind, nature of our body. And that came about as a result of an introduction into meditation and mindfulness when I was about 12 years old. So there were three things that I was taught at that time: that life is uncertain, there's suffering in life, and that there's no such thing called self. So the first two was fairly easy to grasp as a 12-year-old. You saw it around you. But the third one of non-self has been a lifetime inquiry. And it's been a beautiful inquiry. And in the meantime, the practice of meditation, what that did to me was, first of all, slow my life down. I believe I'm somewhere on the spectrum where my mind races all over the map. I'm all over the map. I'm not focused at all at anything. It's a wonder that I'm focused at what I have. I've been focused. Yes, exactly. So that's been a gift, I believe, that I got to be able to manage my mind better through this practice of meditation with a focus on the breath. But one of the other things that taught me with the focus on the breath was where the breath was coming from. I acknowledged the tree. I realized that oxygen was coming from the tree. And I realized also that the carbon dioxide that I'm breathing out is going back into the tree, into the soil, into this earth.
What a cycle, what a beautiful cycle.
Exactly. And in grade 6 in science class, learning about photosynthesis, I remember thinking that, making that direct connection between the practice that I was getting into and getting interested in, and that it was also teaching me a scientific lesson, so a scientific validation of that by learning the cycle of photosynthesis. So that's where I really see the need for us to have that, what I call power of balance between the spiritual and the transactional and the scientific and the technological world that we are immersed in. However, as you and I have talked about this before too, the world of science is now dominating our mindsets, and we're seeing that all over, and that domination has, I believe, got us stuck on the left side of the brain, which is objective oriented, which is rational and logical, all important, strategic, but it is also limiting. It can be dogmatic. It can get stuck on a belief system without us inquiring further into it by just going with the flow with that. So that is where I see the world has got itself into. And I believe that it's, on one hand, we are in a dangerous place because we are not realizing our oneness with nature. So everything is transactional. So what is valued right now in the world is what can be measured, what can be counted. And if you look at who dominates this earth right now, are the people, if you look at the professions, it's the financial professionals, it's the stock markets, they're revered, Wall Street, they're revered, and you measure people's success by their wealth. So it's a number, right? And politics is the same thing, and science is what's backing this.
Yeah, to your point of being a transactional world, for sure, and that whole idea of when we see where the majority of people are in the world right now, it does come back to the bottom line. Yes. And it comes back to who you're accountable, because it's always that they're accountable to their shareholders. But at the end of the day, even corporations are made up of individuals who have to go home at night. And if they've got a picture on the wall, if they have a family, they probably have some pictures of their children and their grandchildren. And I guess what my question is in this great transactional world where everyone is vying to get a bigger house and more things, where is their consciousness as far as what they're leaving behind? That's what...
Great question, Malcolm. I think it's a great inquiry because it's a part of our conditioning. And our conditioning comes from a small age. As you know, we're conditioned between 1 and 10. So we mimic what our parents will do because they have been the most significant influences in your life. And that's then confirmed and reaffirmed and reassured by the education system, which now is more and more transactional and academic. And there's less emphasis given to the arts, to theater, to drama, to sports, which I believe I was so privileged to have that access to all of that in the schooling system, whether it was in Sri Lanka and then when I moved to Canada, being in drama class, getting into the cast of Othello, and studying Shakespeare, even though
What part did you play?
I can't even remember now. It was so long ago. But the thing is, even studying Shakespeare for in high school was it was a love-hate relationship, right? Because we were confused with the language. But we had an amazing teacher in high school called Mr. Blakey. And when you have an inspiring teacher, you bring to life the arts, and what we really learned when I look back I remember studying Macbeth to Othello to Merchant of Venice. Those are the 3 books I remember in the high school years that we studied. And of course you buy the Coles notes, right, to take the shortcuts.
Exactly.
But which makes it palpable and makes it easier for us to bring it down to our level of language. But to realize what's behind it is, at the end of the day, human behavior. The rawness of human behavior we were taught through these plays, through these stories, in terms of the jealousies, the hatreds, the manipulations, and all those emotional things that happen that end up with murder too at the end of the day. And you bring that to life, and you learn so much through that process. And that when that has gone missing from our school system. I don't know whether there's an emphasis on that. Maybe there's still an emphasis in Shakespeare and other Chekhov and all of the other great Western writers that we were also exposed to. They taught us a lot about life and philosophy and the balance that we need to bring. And now where there is a focus on, let's teach young people coding. So what are you doing?
Everybody can't be a coder.
Exactly. But the thing is, you're also promoting somebody to sit in front of the screen, not to talk to anybody, for hours and hours and creating this code. They call it a creative process, but you have to have human interaction at the end of the day. Oxytocin is one of the most important hormones that we have. It comes from touch, as we know, right? And there's a lack of that. So what do we create? We end up creating mediocre human beings in this world of life, in this game of life, and people who cannot then deal with society, who cannot have a conversation with somebody else, who cannot also sometimes live with themselves, because there's a huge battle going on in our own heads.
In many cases.
So,
absolutely.
yeah, exactly. So all of these things are things that can be fixed if we then change our course of actions, change our focus from a world that needs to be counted, needs to be measured for success. What about, if you look at some of the people that we still celebrate, whether it's the great artists of the world, whether it's 1,000 years later, like even somebody like Buddha, 2,500 years later, this person who probably walked around a radius of maybe 20 kilometers went global 2,500 years later. So that
he must have hit the internet. He must have blew up on the internet.
Exactly, the ether of internet,
ethers,
right?
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, so what? You become a successful businessman. You accumulate all this wealth, and you live well. And kudos to you, right? You worked hard. You had a vision. You got it done. But if that was your only focus, then what are you going to be left with at the end of the day?
And for a lot of people, it is their only focus.
Yes.
It really is. I'd just like to buckle back to your comment on Shakespeare and some of those, the famous plays that he put together. And, when you talked about, the tragedies and the hatred and the bickering, and what was that back in was it the 1700s?
Before that. Shakespeare was
1600s?
1600s, right? Yeah.
So almost 400 years ago. And so has anything changed?
That's exactly it, right? Has anything changed? And we are in the 21st century. We have sent people to the moon. We have created technologies. We have created AI now, which is supposed to take over from us. But we are left behind at the end of the day, being the same bestial animal who picks up a stick when you get into an argument, except for our sticks are much more lethal now. We can destroy this whole earth. So is this being smart? That's my inquiry now. As I watch in wonder as what's going on and what's being celebrated and the rhetoric that's coming from so-called the people in power. I don't call them leaders. They're not leaders. No. They're just people who have power, who are drunk with power, who have the hubris, who are arrogant, who are egotistical.
Absolutely.
And narcissistic. Because that's what comes when you don't expand yourself to understand your mind and your brain and how the nature of life is. When I sit down to meditate, I'm humbled by the fact that when I'm breathing in, it's life. When I'm breathing out, it's death. But I was at a symposium a couple of days ago called the Grokis Symposium. And somebody when I said death, somebody said, no, the out-breath is nirvana. Yes. Nirvana, so that's right. When you let go, and that's what it feels like, right? Letting go. Yeah. Because when you take a deep breath in, now I do a lot of breathing exercises. If I get up in the middle of the night and trying to get back to sleep, I slow my breathing down to a level where I count to about maybe 12 for the in-breath and maybe 16 for the out-breath. I bring my metabolism to such a low level so that the breathing in is actually hard work. Because you are actually now intentionally pulling.
And you're expanding the lungs so that
Exactly. And that's the work that we are putting in to live, right? But then breathing out is what brings us down to get us to that space, the spaciousness, the openness, to let go. That's what you're doing, right? So it's a paradox too at the end of the day, right? But we are breathing in for life, but we are breathing out to let go, because that's the cycle of life. It's on and off, up and down. And when we try to fix that, you cannot keep breathing in, right? Just like I love chocolate, and if I after my second chocolate bar, I'm sick, right?
But that doesn't happen with air, does it, Lalith?
No. Well, it does, because
does it?
because we have to stop breathing and breathe out.
Right. That's true. We can only take so much in.
Exactly.
Before we need to that's a beautiful metaphor, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. So letting go is that sort of releasing everything. And what happens to the heart is there's what's called a vagal tone in the heart. When you're breathing in, your heart rate is supposed to go up. When you're breathing out, your heart rate goes down. So that's a vagal tone. So when you're breathing properly, when you're breathing well into your lungs, and in that practice, that's exactly what's happening. That's what gives you that endocrine, the organic balance that we need, the homeostatic balance that we need internally, which we are not doing well. So fundamentally, we are doing a couple of things not right at the moment.
Only a couple of things.
Couple of things, I would say. And the first fundamental thing is we are not breathing properly, right? If I ask people, how many of you in a typical classroom setting, if I ask them how many of you pay attention to your breath, maybe 2 people will say yes out of 10. And those 2 people are probably doing yoga, some exercise process, there's a focus on the breath, or some they've done martial arts where there's been a focus on the breath, or they're singers,
right,
or swimmers where they know the breath is an important.
But we're going to change that, aren't we, Lalith?
That's what we want to do. That's what we want to do.
So your whole talk of the breath is a really good lead-in for me to go back to your Buddhist roots, and maybe we can discuss a little bit about the whole belief system of Buddhism and attachment and suffering and
Well, first of all, I look at Buddhist teachings as a study into a psychology. Mm-hmm. I don't look at it as a religion.
Right.
It's not a dogma because it's not based on faith. I don't have to. So there was one sutra that Buddha expounded on called the Kalama Sutra. He said, look, everybody, do not take my word for it. This is the route I took to practice. Use that as a guide and practice for yourself, and then find out for yourself. Don't follow me blindly is what you said. So for me, that is a beautiful way of saying take responsibility for yourself. So you don't depend on anybody else or anything else for this inner awareness, inner knowledge that you're gaining. So that alone then gives us, everybody, an opportunity to take responsibility for themselves. But at the same time, there's a paradox here too, that when I meditate, I know I'm dependent on that tree. When I meditate, I also realize my interdependence with other human beings. First of all, the mother who carried me, the mother who nurtured me, and the father and the family that I needed, I was dependent on, and I continue to be dependent on so many people around me, so many sentient beings around me, so many things around me. So that alone humbles me, and essentially the Buddhist teachings have taught me those principles through the practice, those fundamental foundations of life. And I talked about the 3 principles, 3 truths that the Buddha puts out and tells us to figure it out for ourselves. The suffering is and life is not satisfactory, and there's suffering in life, and that everything is impermanent and uncertain. And then this whole notion of non-self. So that has been an interesting inquiry, because then there's the 4 noble truths that were taught. So the 4 noble truths then focuses on suffering, and that to realize that there are some causes for suffering. And then the 3rd noble truth is to find out what that cause is, and that then you realize the cause for suffering is attachment. Right? So when we attach ourselves to my identity, I call myself a Sri Lankan. If I call myself from a race, I'm a Sri Lankan Sinhala Buddhist. I then had that attachment to that identity based on how tight I am attached to that, and how that attachment is defining who I am, and my ego is now attached to it too. If somebody says something about my Sinhala or Sri Lankanness or Buddhism and attacks it or criticizes it, if I'm not enlightened to really have that space between those so-called identities and myself, I'm going to defend it. I'm going to get angry. I'm going to get hurt, because it's an insult to me when somebody insults my race, my nationality, my religion, my school. So
but is that not a form of attachment as well?
Exactly. So all of these attachments are what is bringing us suffering, right?
Mm-hmm.
So learning that fairly early in life, one learns to put things in perspective. I really rarely, if somebody asks me, okay, what's your background? I say Sri Lankan because, it's an easy way to define it. Then somebody says, are you Sinhala or Tamil? And I'm uncomfortable answering that question, because that created a war, right? I mean, that separation.
Right.
But I do say yes, but I don't, I believe I have, in my DNA, there's Tamil, there's North Indian, there's South Indian, there could be Moors, because Sri Lanka was at crossroads. There were Arab traders came, the 1300s, the Chinese came, then the Portuguese came, and it's a hodgepodge of a nation. So who knows, right? If I do my DNA, that'll be everything. So how can I then call myself a Sinhala? Because then if you look at the science behind it and say, do a DNA test, if I have all of these different things, I can't define myself as Sinhala. But still, in Sri Lanka right now, there's a Sinhala nationalistic agenda that's still at play, in spite of the hard lessons that we should have learned after a brutal war of that separation.
But we still see this going on even today. I mean, currently, as we're sitting here, the Israelis and the Palestinians or Palestinians, and I mean, that's because as humans, we seem to want to categorize everybody. We want to put a label on. We want to identify. Yes. And we even see that in health and wellness.
Yes.
You'll talk to somebody and they'll say, well, I'm a diabetic.
Yes.
Well, no, you're not a diabetic. Yes. You have an immune condition called diabetes.
Yes.
And so when someone embodies becoming a diabetic, well, I can't do that. And I'm not trying to downplay that fact that people are diabetics. I'm just using that as an example. But it's just like we want to pigeonhole everybody. You have to be a race, you have to be a gender, you have to, everything has to, and that's where I think we get caught up in the attachment.
Absolutely. So following on from the third is the fourth noble truth, which is a way of life, a way of being. It's called the Noble Eightfold Pathway. So there are 8 things that we are. These are all suggestions, right? This is a path that you can inquire for yourself and take, and they form 3 categories. One is the focus, because the practice is important, because there's a process that one has to quiet the mind to inquire and into how the mind works, how the body works, the nature of life, and that comes from concentration. A meditation practice where you quiet your mind and then gain insights, gain the wisdom from keeping that chatter out of the mind. And that space enables you to realize the impermanence of life, realize the suffering that we have, to realize also that when there's suffering, there can be joy and happiness too. But that needs a mindset change. That needs us to get a hold of the mind, which can get stuck on the suffering side and be victimized by it, but also to say, no, but I refuse to be victimized by it. How do I put this in perspective and move forward? Yes, I didn't like what I heard, but how am I not going to allow my ego to get caught up in that and then move on by taking steps to think more positively about what I heard? So easier said than done. Easier said than done, because we are very emotional beings. We are anchored by emotions, And emotions of anger, fear, anxiety, all those are important, crucial emotions for our survival, as you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if we didn't have them, we won't be around right now, right? If we didn't have the fear of emotion of fear, you and I won't be here, because we would have walked in front of a saber-toothed tiger 200,000 years ago.
Right.
So even the emotion of jealousy, which has such a bad rap in modern society, because from when we were growing up, our parents were told us, don't be jealous of your sister, so it has a stigma attached to envy and jealousy. So what we do is, when we get our jealous and envious feelings, which is so natural as we live amongst others, that we suppress it. And the more we suppress it, then the more problems we have, because we are not addressing it. So it manifests itself in our behavior in other ways. So when somebody gets a promotion, and not you, when somebody gets chosen for the basketball team and not you, so you're going to have those envious feelings because your friend.
But what if you could turn that envy into joy and sort of get to a place where, you're going to say, yeah, I wish I had that job too. But what if you could feel joy for when someone made the basketball team or someone got a promotion? That's shifting your whole perception, I think, right?
Exactly.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say was, yes, so that is where you have to wallow in that emotion first. You have to really feel it. Where is it bugging me? Where is it hurting me? What part of my body is really aching now that I didn't get chosen? And I put so much effort into it, and somebody I feel who's not as good as me got chosen. And you have to really work through that internally first.
Right.
Do the inner work before you can overcome it. And then eventually even have a conversation with this person and say, hey, you know what, man, I'm really jealous of you, and I think I should have gotten there. And that way you verbalize this emotion and get
instead
it out
of suppressing it.
Exactly.
Right.
And once you verbalize it, then you dealt with it now. You're happy for this person. You can move on to look at other things and do other things rather than
that could
get
be
focused.
The reason for a lot of things that the world is repressing, and we're like a powder keg ready to go off. I'd like to buckle back to what you said originally when you talked about, I think it was the three.
The three, yes.
Right, and then the last one was self.
Yes.
And you were saying how hard it would be for a 12-year-old to conceptualize that idea of not having a self. And I almost think that when you look at a newborn baby, and I don't know if it's 3-4 months, they start to realize that the fingers that are up in front of their eyes are actually a part of their body. And think about that concept that it's like the fish not knowing it's in the water, right? Yes. So there's a time where that baby is not consciously aware that these appendages are a part of its body. Yes. So it almost seems like with that evolution of coming to self is that we've got to realize that there is a self.
Yes.
And then counteractively let that self go. So, and that's probably why we have such a hard time, because people aren't willing to do the work at letting go of the self or realizing this isn't even who we are.
Exactly.
It's changed how many times in our lives. So
exactly. At the level of quantum physics, all this is atoms, right? When we look at it, but for the sort of, if you're looking at it from a sort of a normal, I would say, day-to-day point of view, it exists, right? So I know that self exists from, as you rightfully said, I will discover as I'm growing up, I got hands and I've got my feet, and then when I scream, I get the attention of somebody, and so you realize that you also have a sense of agency.
Cause and effect.
A cause and effect, you see that happening. Yeah. So that form, the physical form, is one way. Then feelings is a way that we realize that there's a self. When the feelings arise, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling happy, I'm feeling sad,
shame, feeling all those.
Exactly. And then from there, you have the next one, which is perceptions. Now, through this, you're perceiving things around you. You're understanding things around you. You know that what works and what doesn't work. You realize it as you grow into your 1 and 2 with the interactions you have with your immediate family members. And the perceptions then grow as then you're exposed to the world, and you create your mental models, the world views that are out there. So all of that are the indications that there is a self there. And then that constitutes our consciousness.
It creates a story.
It creates a story.
Our story.
Exactly. But the trick is, it's a delusion, right? And that's the subtle learning of that comes through the meditation. Because breathing in and out alone makes you realize how fragile. Like when I sit and meditate, I realize my fragility.
Mm-hmm.
Because when this stops, in 4 or 5 minutes, I'm gone.
Yeah.
That's it. Right? So how can I then look at myself as a permanent being? How can I then live life as everything is permanent and everything is certain? So that gets taken out immediately when you realize your fragility and your vulnerability as a human being, and how easy it is for me to perish. I jump out of this window and I'll be gone. Second floor. That's it. Right?
And yet we're not consciously aware every morning when we jump in our car that we could either lose our life or take someone else's. And so you're right, that's that fragility that we take so much for granted, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's a natural order of things, right? When we are born, we live and we die. So it is towards the end of our life. I'm 64 years old now. I guess it has come to my notice more and more because I'm athletic and I play sports still. The last rugby game I played was when I was 60, and I'd still like to go back and play a game of rugby, right? Because I feel fit, I can run, I can do all that too. But I also know the last rugby game I played at 60, I actually I started a Wim Hof breathing process.
Right. Oh my gosh, that's
the crazy
we could
Dutchman.
do a whole podcast on that.
Exactly. I got exposed to him about 4 years ago, and I was fascinated by him. And I have another person I follow called Elissa Epple. Elissa Epple focuses on telomeres.
Telomeres, yeah.
That's right. So Elizabeth Blackburn and Elissa Epple work on them, University of San Francisco, Southern California.
Reversing aging. Almost.
Exactly. Well, at least bringing the chronological and the biological age to align, right? Yeah, and you can move a little bit this way too if you're really keeping fit and all that too. But many of us are biologically much older than our chronologically age because of our lifestyle, right? So she's showing that. But when she started working with Wim Hof too, I was fascinated and to validate what he was doing, because I jump into the deep end with all of these things, right? I immediately started trying it and I started getting dizzy, and I thought, well, this is a special feeling. So I started doing it.
So maybe you might want to, for people who might not know what the Wim Hof method is, you might want to just elaborate on that.
Sure. So Wim Hof is this person who spent a bit of time, he had a tragic tragedy in his life where his wife died at a young age. She actually committed suicide. It's a tragic story, and she left him with 4 kids. So he was really lost in life. He started looking at spirituality and spiritual practices and ended up going to Tibet and Himalayas, and he came across these Tibetan monks who is, in sub-zero weather, wearing hardly any clothes, can get their body temperatures to high levels by just modulating the breathing. And this phenomenon was actually studied in the 1950s by a doctor called Herbert Benson, a professor academic called Herbert Benson. When he brought these theories down to, I can't remember which university in the US, again, they were debunked. They said, look, this is magical stuff, we're not going to go down there, But he has documented those stories. So Wim Hof learned those techniques and came back, and he's, I think many people know him as the Iceman. He's a person who can jump into a tank of ice and stay there for.
But he does it through a breathing technique.
Technique by enabling his body to withstand, by increasing the body temperature, by doing that. So his basic breathing technique was take some deep breaths, 30 deep breaths, like filling your lungs fully and filling your chest fully and just releasing the breath 30 times, and then holding your breath after that for as long as you can. So you hold your breath to a level where, for me, you're almost
passing out?
Before passing out, you urinate. You
let really?
Because that's the first thing that happens, right? Fear is you let go of your
So have you taken it to that level?
Oh yeah.
Really?
Yeah. And I have to fight. I have to tighten. And there are some days like, But what you're doing
it always depends, right?
It depends.
It
depends. So the thing is, what it does is you're training your body to go into a place of extreme stress, mentally and physically, by doing this. It's not for the faint-hearted. You got to start slowly, and if you're going to try it, please, don't do it alone. Because if you pass out,
you have to be able to either drop your testicles or your ovaries, right?
Exactly.
To be able to do it.
Exactly. So the thing is, I started doing this about a year before. I think I was about 59, and I found myself, my physical endurance got a new life now. I ran still, but I was slowing down in my running and all of that too. But then I felt that my whole body was getting a new lease of life. And it was in that context that I went to a rugby tournament. Sri Lanka rugby is big in the urban schools, and there's a Sri Lankan rugby tournament in Malcolm.
So that's sort of like our football here.
Yes. So I went for one of those games, and then I just sort of show up, and my old school is playing there. But I, got asked to play for a team.
Were these people of similar age, or were you?
No, there are lots of young. I was probably one of the few people who were, there were a couple others late 50s, and yes, there were a couple others 60, maybe just a couple
never
of years older.
Never underestimate age, right, Lalo?
Yeah, never underestimate. Yeah. And it was incredible, the endurance that I felt as if I was in my 30s again. And I could run, I could turn, I could go. And there was a point where the ball was, I was taking on two people, and they had the ability to pass the ball to each other. And I was running towards one person.
I would have loved to have heard the play-by-play on that one.
Yes.
And Lalith moves into the lead. Yeah.
Yes, but as soon as I was going toward him, he chipped the ball, I kicked it a little bit, and I had to turn. And I did a quick turn, and I just accelerated, and I heard a snap.
Oh no!
Duck.
And that snap was on you?
On me.
Oh.
And then I flipped, and I just fell to the ground in pain. At the end of the day, my endurance level had become so beautiful, but my body was still 60. Right? Even though I'm fit and all that, I snapped a hamstring.
Yeah.
And I've done
it's
that
like
before.
A car, right? I mean, eventually the fan belt goes, so, and we're ligaments and tendons, and they only can get stretched.
Exactly.
And that could have happened to a young person as well.
Funnily enough,
I mean a younger person.
Yes, but funnily enough, it happened to our son. So our son and I, Rahel, who's an amazing athlete, he didn't warm up enough. He did some great runs, and he pulled his hamstring too. Mm-hmm. So the two of us are hobbling around. So it happened to him, and it happened to me, and I'm 60 and he's like 20, 21 or something. But that's because he didn't warm up properly. But
right.
Even with my warming up, it happened to me because the body is worn. So to speak to non-self, this is what non-self is about. That this body is going to deteriorate, and so the telomeres are going to end up dormant, and it's going to die. And this body will become lifeless.
So I don't want to go too far into that this time, but there's a Dr. David Sinclair that's doing a lot of research on the telomeres and anti-aging through things like intermittent fasting and ice baths and things like that, or cold showers, bringing your temperature down. And I mean, he's saying that, because of our lifestyle previous, we were hunter and gatherers, so we're used to going through. So we're eating too much, bottom line. Yes. And what he's saying is the cold water actually triggers something in the body that resets maybe a clock. So I think there's some pretty good stuff coming down the pipe, and we'll have to look at that. So, I'd like to just, again, keeping on the line of mindfulness and meditation, we know that, I'm big about energy and vibrational energy. And so we know that our thoughts are an energy, and our thoughts, everything, this table was a thought at one time before it manifested into a table, right? Someone had to have that thought, I'm going to build a table. And so, I love the saying that Wayne Dyer had said years ago, that he said, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And that's so profound. And you'd mentioned earlier about perception, the perception of the self, the perception. Maybe we can just, elaborate a little bit about that, about how important, how we perceive everything, and how our thoughts have such a command. And if we change our thoughts, we can change our life.
Absolutely. And within limitations, right? I mean, there is a terms of reference. There are boundaries to all these. But we probably are kind of stuck in a very narrow band of our thought process based on our conditioning. So our hopes and fears, and our fears have been instilled in us from a young age, and that's what then narrows our thought process and limits our potential, our true potential. So when we can overcome that, and as an entrepreneur, as a business person, because there were many conditions that enabled me to, my cousin and I, who started a solar business back then, to take those risks, because basically our fundamental needs were met, basic needs were met. We had psychological safety, we had a safety of a home, we had great parents. All of that enabled us to take the kind of risks that we did. But the thing is, those were, when I look back as 20-somethings, what we did in starting a solar business, and when we put our intention out there, how we noticed that so many things were just showing up in front of us. Because the intention was, we were focused in doing something, but we were open-minded enough, we were exuberant, and with our youthfulness, we were foolish and all of that too. But there was one thing that we had going for ourselves. We had that vision of, you know what, there is a business to be had here, because so many people don't have electricity, and when we can give them a technology that'll help them, benefit them. And that was our incentive.
Being of service. Exactly.
But then we didn't take no for an answer from anybody.
Right.
And we had some great people who supported us, who thought like that too. And one person was Arthur C. Clarke, the science fiction writer, who happened to live in Sri Lanka. And he was the first person.
Who was it?
Sir Arthur C. Clarke, 2001 Space Odyssey.
Oh, really?
Yes. And he's a futurist, right? And he was a close friend, and he inspired us. He introduced us to a couple other people, another inventor called Ray Vijayawardena. They became our real mentors. Ray became a mentor, and then there was another person who owned a lab. His name was Prem Sumanasekara. He was a former teacher. He owned a company that was making lab equipment. He brought us under his wings. So all of these things came about as a result of the manifestation of, we'll make it work. This is incredible. We got, so for instance, when, one thing we did was when I graduated from Seneca College with an engineering technology diploma, and I was offered a job with Ontario Hydro as a nuclear plant operator, and my cousin graduated with a BCom degree from U of T. So when we were offered jobs, we said no. We had already decided that we want to see the world before we settle down. So that alone expanded our reach, because we were not running in fear. Now I got to get a job. I got to now pay off my school loan. Thankfully, my parents, started paying the school loan while I was here. So we had those support networks.
But that experience was such a gift to you. I mean,
yes.
It really was.
Yes. So all that happened because we thought outside the box. We were not willing to go with the status quo of, you graduate, you get a job, then eventually, if you're so inclined, you get married, start a family, the rite of passage, right? Get a mortgage and get the house, and it is fairly set in how that works.
Well, it's a difference between what people call security, and I mean, as we know, because we're both entrepreneurs, I mean, yes. I've only ever had one job in my life, and yes. So it takes a bit of ironclad stomach sometimes to,
yes,
and to eliminate fear.
Exactly. Put it in perspective.
Right.
Because it's not being stupid, right?
No.
It's also being strategic to think, okay, you know what? If everything falls apart,
calculated risk.
Exactly. I can go back home and start all over again.
Yeah.
As long as I have my body and my sound
right.
mind, I can speak, I can say something, I've got some skills, I can survive. And I have lived like that, thinking like that the entire life. And I've also run away from situations where I haven't allowed myself to get stagnated anywhere. As soon as I started really being called an expert in renewable energy and solar, and
you were out the door.
I was exit stage left. I went out. That's it. Life is getting.
It's like another Macbeth play.
Exactly. So then I jump into something else, which I was passionate about. I got into this training business with a partner that I had Robert Vanderwall. He was a close friend. I admired him for what he did. He had an amazing training business in Australia. We talked a lot about it. I had a lot of interest in organizational development and leadership and bringing in the mindfulness and meditation aspects into that emotional intelligence space. So that's the way I sort of went out there. So to come back to what you just said in terms of the mindset and becoming fearless, providing you have some of those safety nets there, becoming fearless and pushing the boundaries, then it's as if the universe will open up and show up to you.
Yeah. People
will show up to you, right? Even you and I are here because we showed up through our close friends, right? And then we spent some time together. You had a need, I had a need. You know, we helped each other out, and so we are here now, and we are evolving a relationship. We don't know where it'll end up. It's not dependent on money at all.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
So
that's where friendships, the basis of a good friendship,
yes,
it's not transactional, right? We talked about that before, about the corporate world and being transactional. Real friendships, real relationships of substance don't have to have, in other words, no one has to gain anything but the pleasure of each other's company, the knowledge that can be gained in that exchange.
Exactly. It stands the test of time. It stands the test of beliefs and ideologies. It transcends all that. Real friendships will transcend all. It'll transcend fear. It'll transcend, all the other things that come to bear and come to get in between relationships, right? And those are true friendships and true relationships. And from a business point of view too, my business ecosystem, and the global business ecosystem I have, are people who we have common ground in that. We have explored beyond the transactional about meaning and purpose, about giving to each other, helping each other, beyond the money part of it. Because money part of it is there, it's important, and I am not very good at sort of having that discussion up front, because I rather it not being there. But it's a practical reality, it has to be there. But I pay much more attention to the relationship. So when I do business, I make sure I look after the people who brought me the business first.
Right.
Which has helped me for a lifetime, where people are willing to talk to me then, from all walks of life.
It's like you've got bank accounts all over the place.
Yes.
In the ethers, in a sense.
Yes, and also I can show up in many parts of the world and knock on somebody's door, and I have a place to sleep and get some food.
Yeah.
And I've done that, tested that. We've showed up with 4 kids, across Europe, and knock. They look at the kids, they go, "Oh, come on in."
I see you've had a few kids since I saw you last.
Yes.
Lalith, I'd like to just buckle back. I know that you're doing an awful lot of you're working with companies. So although you're immersed in the spiritual world and you have an amazing understanding of self or non-self, duality, non-duality, you see, because you're bringing that into the business world. And when we're talking about mediocrity and untapped potential, which I see as everyone is in this world, is just untapped potential, and I don't see a place for mediocrity in this world. I think that's a wasted life when someone doesn't live it to their fullest. And it all comes back to what we talked about being an entrepreneur and that entrepreneurial spirit. So where do you see, with what you're sharing in the corporate world or with small businesses, do you see that entrepreneur is going to be the one that's going to have the conscious bottom line, that's going to turn the proverbial Titanic around to save the world, in a sense?
Well, it's business who runs the world right now. The corporate world runs it for very reasons that the world is measured by dollars and cents right now. So whoever has the biggest wealth right now can dictate terms. And that person or the people who are doing that, they're carrying an immense responsibility. And sometimes they're deluded because of the fact that they are not in touch with reality. And that is one of the biggest dangers that we have on this earth right now. Because when you're removed from the realities of the ground, when you don't talk to the people who are at the grassroots level, who don't value a service that a caregiver would give to a spouse, who don't value a mother nurturing a child.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest tragedy that the world is seeing right now.
But it still comes down to the fact that a life is a life is a life. And I mean, how can anybody be so detached from and withdrawn from reality to not see that a child that is, right now on the Palestinian side, and I'm not trying to get political, I'm just using that as an example, or a child on the Israeli side, does it really matter who they are? It's a life.
Yeah.
And I think that, that's a sad situation that we've got that far detached.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying, by all means, not everyone's like that, but just seems those people seem to get into power, right?
See, that's the thing. That's where the institutional frameworks are right now. Like when I was living in Sri Lanka, I did a lot of work after selling our business in 1999. I was invited by the UN and the World Bank and various agencies to work as a consultant. Now, because I had a Canadian passport, my daily rate was between $600 and $800 a day. Mm-hmm. Somebody who had a Sri Lankan passport, who was more qualified than me, would get half that rate by virtue of his or her passport. So that alone shows how the value of the human being has been based on a passport right now, based on a citizenship.
It's not an egalitarian society by any means.
No. So that's where even in wars, when you demonize people, it's easy for somebody to become so cold and calculating, and that's what's happening everywhere. I mean, it happened in Sri Lanka, it happened in Vietnam, Korea. It's happening right now in Israel and Palestine too. So,
and what it is it's I'm fascinated with consciousness levels, and I've been studying them for 20 years now. And it's they say that 80% of the world is trapped in a certain level, and it's not a high level of consciousness. It's and it has nothing to do with intelligence, because some of these people that are in power have multiple university degrees, and they have knowledge. They have knowledge, but knowledge is only good if it's used to the right purposes. And so from a consciousness level, when we look at even self-actualization, Abraham Maslow, created that hierarchy of needs. And so once we reach, the basic needs and we get to the point where we start to self-actualize, we have to hit certain levels before we pole jump into the other areas. And I'm wondering, Malcolm Gladwell, who wrote The Tipping Point, talked about the fact that we don't need 50% buy-in to get the scales to tip. And he claims anywhere 10 to 15%. And I'm wondering, how realistic do you think it is? People like you and I'm using the magazine as a platform. We're going to do podcasts, trying to get the word out there of slowing the mind down, creating a stillness within to find our humanity again. How realistic do you think? Do you think if more and more people like us continue to talk like this, that?
Yes. I think there's an awakening that's happening with a lot of people post-pandemic too. They're realizing some of the realities of what happened even during the pandemic, and I think that's waking a lot of people up, because people had a lot of time to think too, right, about their life and about their priorities and things like that too. So yes, there's intelligence, there's high levels of intellect of how to get things done, and that's from the left side of the brain. But what's missing is wisdom and insight. And when you sit and quiet your mind, you're able to get to the other side of the brain, which is full of wisdom, which is trust in the universe, which is compassionate and open and innovative and creative, which has a huge, pure potential on the right side of the brain. So it's not to get stuck in the right side of the brain too, then you become a lotus eater, right? So it's
balance, right?
Yes, it's how do you find that balance? And I love the way Jill Bolte Taylor in her book, Whole Brain Living, she has put it forward in a way. How do we find that balance? In her book, she says there are 4 processes: thinking and feeling, emotional and thinking, left brain, and emotional and thinking, right brain. And when we identify ourselves stuck in one or the other, then when we through what she also promotes the practice of meditation and going into the breath to
She
stop
had a
the
stroke,
thought process.
didn't she? And she
exactly.
Yeah.
My stroke of insight.
Yeah.
You know, so she has proven to us the power of the brain, power of our mind to be able to transcend the left to come to the right side of the brain. Because the left brain is a tyrannical brain too, because it's the side of the brain that scolds us, keeps us motivated
So is that
fear
where the
and all
ego
that.
lives most of the time?
Ego is living there and all of that too. Now, it's a complex. Now, I'm just simplifying all this in what I'm saying. It's a very complex, as we know, a mechanism, organism, the brain is. But for our intents, for our purposes, it's an easier way of understanding that whether it's on the left side or the right side, that when we let go of our fears, that things that limit us, things that make us jealous and angry and upset, and we become self-righteous in I'm right, you're wrong, you know, and that's what creates a problem in the world, right? And we have created
need to be right.
I need to be right, and Europe became technologically and scientifically advanced from about 500 years since, and of course it started from Athens and Plato and Socrates.
And it's just exponentially.
Yes, and Europe was able to conquer the world, and it used the Chinese invention of gunpowder in an interesting way. And so you show up in a ship now, 1505. This big sailing ship shows up. So I'm just thinking of my ancestors who are sitting on the beach.
They would never have heard a bang before.
Exactly.
Like that.
Exactly. And then this person whose skin color is pale gets off this in a funny outfit and has his stick. And then at first I'm being welcoming, but then I'm getting a bit anxious and scared, and I try to attack the person. And the next person watching him, this person heard a bang and he's down.
Right.
So what are you going to think? This is somebody from the heavens.
Right. Oh.
The powers that they have. So you immediately become subjugated to.
Yes, absolutely.
Hence
the beginning of colonialism.
Exactly. And that mindset, which all of us in Sri Lanka were subjected to, right? I mean, we were indigenous before all of this happened. At some point, my father and I went to the same Catholic school in Kandy called St. Anthony's College, and my mother went to an Anglican school in Colombo. And my father said stories in the 1930s when he was in school. The monks, the teachers, the oblate monks, they had a bottle of chili powder. If he spoke in his native language to his friend, he'd get chili powder in his mouth.
Really? So they wanted to promote English?
English, and his second language was Greek and Latin. Wow. So he grew up where he knew his mother tongue to speak with, but he didn't have an academic knowledge.
He would have lost some of those nuances.
He lost it. But he picked it back up because he did his own study after the words of the language and got his accreditation.
But that's the sad part of just, they wanted to make everything homogenous. They didn't want, any sort of the spice of life, literally,
So the vestiges of that, and I'm not blaming that, that's the history and that's the way it was. And there were many, many things, good things that came out of that, right? In many of these countries too. I mean, there were governance systems that were set up, justice systems that were set up. But what was apparent was there were two levels of justice, two levels of governance.
Right.
So those are things that in Sri Lanka, post independence, the people like us who were Anglicized Sri Lankans took over the role of the colonists and continued on, which created violence later on in the country.
Right.
Because
it created another sense of a two-tier system or a hierarchy or a class system. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we see, these are, when you realize that these are all mental constructs,
right,
then you transcend them. However, even a country like Sri Lanka, which has a Buddhist foundation, can go down to the transactional process. Because I would say when you don't practice it, so I was lucky that I grew up in a home where my father was a teacher, philosopher, he wasn't a ritual Buddhist. He didn't go to temple and sort of ask for favors. And that happens even in Buddhism, which is not supposed to be
well,
there.
you see that in classical religion here now, that when people need something, they get into their prayer mode, right?
Exactly.
Only on an as-needs basis.
Exactly, right? Exactly. And a Buddhist practice, which is actually not, it's not the case. You cannot worship somebody
right.
And expect favors. So there's
but
no.
The Buddhist faith is really not. It's not a deity you're really worshiping.
No.
There's no dogma. There doesn't seem to be any dogma in it.
There's no dogma there, even though there are influences. There are
Yeah.
Hindu influences. There are various other influences that have brought the magic and the miracle of life into various teachings of Buddhism. Which then there's a faith there. And luckily my father was not superstitious. He was very logical, rational person on one side, but he was a spiritually grounded person on the other side, and lucky that he had a sort of eclectic group of friends growing up, from monks, Buddhist monks, to Hindu philosophers, to Muslim clerics, to who I would see growing up. They would show up and they'd be dressed differently. I'd think, okay, that's the different dress from what I. And so I was exposed to all that from a young age, and he had a great library of books, and that's another thing that I was exposed to from a young age.
Reading.
Reading. But I didn't really start reading properly till I was about 14, 15, even though I was exposed to it.
Well, you probably couldn't have conceptualized and internalized it.
Yes. So all those things are there. So I think, Malcolm, what we are doing here is we're not threatening anybody. We are talking about living a life based on loving kindness and compassion.
Absolutely, yeah.
We're acknowledging the fact that you and I are here from a loving union of two human beings, in most cases in love, who became vulnerable to each other. That union brought us together, the sperm and the egg together in a fusion.
Right.
So that alone should inform us that it is this interbeing, which Thich Nhat Hanh calls interbeing, our coexistence, cohabitation, co-creation, our interdependency is how we can thrive and flourish, not separation.
Right.
So the nuclear bomb is a fission, is a separation.
Right.
So that is a great metaphor to think about,
it is,
because that separation will really perpetuate the suffering. The joy and happiness comes through coming together. So it's really, I really feel that.
I really I've been following the Course in Miracles, I think I've told you, for probably the last 20 years. And I love one of the lines in the Course. It says, we think we have many problems in the world, and yet we really only have one. And that's our belief in our separateness from one another.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, if I hurt you, I really hurt myself in that. And so when we realize that, with a collective consciousness, and even that we're all part of the same, although we appear to arrive in silos and then we try to connect our minds, we are really, just one.
Absolutely.
I'd like to ask your opinion on this. I really love this quote from Eckhart Tolle. He said, the universe will give you whatever experiences are most beneficial for the evolution of your consciousness. And I had that on my bathroom wall going back 12, 14 years ago. And I used to look at it every morning, and then I had something happen to me about 10 years ago that literally took me to my knees and almost took me out. And over the last 10 years, I've crawled out of the bucket literally, and I've built myself back up. And I look back now, and I wouldn't probably be doing what I'm doing right now if it hadn't have been for being, I said the universe chewed me up and spat me back out and said, dust yourself off, get back up and move forward. And so when I look at that the universe will give you whatever experience is most beneficial for the evolution of your consciousness. And a lot of times it's not on our terms.
Yeah.
And it's not how we would have pole vaulted to the next, I'm not saying the next level, I don't want to, but to just have a new way of looking at things.
Yes,
yes,
absolutely.
And so I just would like your...
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, that's a great saying, because it's our tragedies and our suffering that teaches us. So we don't like going through those experiences, but if we can go through those experiences with our eyes and ears and mind open and feeling that suffering, where is it feeling? I don't like what I'm feeling right now. I don't like the position I'm right now. I feel vulnerable and I feel scared. But really shining a light on that enables us to really bring it to the surface and deal with it a bit more objectively, right? So all of those things, we have absolutely no control over this roller coaster of life. How do we find equanimity? So there are 4 other things that talk about it too. So in a Buddhist saying, there is metta. Metta is being loving and kind, right? And then karuna is that's my father's name too.
Oh, really?
Karuna is
Karola.
compassion. Karuna.
Karuna
Yes.
is compassion.
Compassion. Be compassionate to yourself first. So all of these, you got to be to yourself first. Loving and kind to yourself first, compassionate to yourself. Then you be compassionate
Because
towards
we can't
others.
give away what we don't have to give.
Exactly. And the other one is mudita, which is sympathetic joy, which is really thrive on other people's success too.
So
Because-
going back to what we talked earlier about
Exactly.
feeling joy for someone's...
Exactly. And it's an integral part of finding our happiness and joy and equanimity. The next one is upekkha. Upekkha is then we can live a life of equanimity through the roller coaster of life. We are able to deal with the storms of life with a sense of balance and understanding.
And it's coming to that realization that, maybe sometimes it is like riding a surfboard, right? And we don't know what wave is coming behind us. But if we can have our feet planted on the board and we're flexible enough, we can handle that wave, right? And hopefully, have a bit of smooth sailing. And
Exactly. And I love this word. It was coined by a professor called Bill Torbert, where I did an amazing master's program in University of Bath in my mid-40s called Responsibility and Business Practice. We studied his work, and this word is called power of balance. But he used it in a slightly different way. I call it the power of balance from we're used to power being your force, the will, the hardcore power. But the other power is a soft power that we carry. The personal power that we have that comes from a value system, from our integrity, from our respect for others, respect for self. So compassionate, being loving and kind and open. Because being compassionate and being loving and kind through difficult situation is a very courageous act.
yeah, so we shouldn't pervert the word power, because power really is what propels us forward. So it's not about authority always when we think of power.
It's about influence.
It's about influence, yeah.
Right? And that's the way I like to look at it.
Yeah.
And that balance is what we need to do. So balance between the soft and the hard. Because I have to be hard at some point. I have to power my way through by forcing my way through in some occasion. But I have to also balance that with the soft power to give, to compromise, to understand.
So that's almost the antithesis, and when we look at the polarities too. Are you familiar with the Master Key System by Charles F. Hannell?
No, I am not.
I looked at it quite a few years ago, and I want to revisit it. But basically, it looks at a lot of the universal laws, like the law of rhythm, the law of balance, the law of attraction is one of them, the law of polarity, and I think there's another one. But basically, in a sense, he talks a lot about like a pendulum. And so, when you even look at the law of polarity, the law of polarity is when you swing from one end to the other. And that's, when we talk about people being bipolar, they go from the manic to the depressive. And we can end up being that in our lives. We can, and how do we find that balance? And so the law of rhythm, the law of balance, the law of polarity, and then, that energetic law of attraction as well. But it's sort of, a lot of this information it's all interconnected. Yeah. The messages are all the same.
Yes.
It's just that we all hear them in different ways.
Yes. And we have to commit ourselves to a daily practice, no matter what. I'm a great proponent of mind-body. So physical exercise is extremely important. And then the meditation, the focus of the mind and getting that space is extremely important for us to put things in perspective and start that day off with a sense of with an intention that it's going to be a great day. So the physical ability, the agility, the flexibility, all that manifests itself in the flexibility and the agility in the brain. So the power of the brain comes from the physical exercise too. So along with good sleep, good diet, great relationships, loving, kind, all of that, which you in your Living Well venture really promotes, Malcolm. So,
Well, Lalith, I want to thank you so much for your time, and it's been a great day. It's been a really great day.
I love it.
Thanks so much, Lalith.
So I should speak with a Sri Lankan accent.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes.
So I would like to do this again. I think, there's, we just scratched the scratch, and, maybe I'm sure there's quite a few other avenues that we could explore. And I think people appreciate and want to learn more about this. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Malcolm, for this wonderful opportunity, and all the very best with Living Well venture as well as your podcast too. And I know we will make a difference out there. Yeah. At least one person.
And that's what I always say. If we only can touch a handful of people,
yeah.
And then if things become exponential, you remember that? Do you remember that commercial years ago for, I can't remember, it was a shampoo, and it was like, she said, and I told 2 friends, and they told 2 friends, and so on. And then the cameras kept on, like, it was just like split screen, like you had 50, and they were telling, so it's that's where I think the power of one is misunderstood. People really don't think that I'm only one person. Heck, I'll just continue on with my life as the way it is, because what good am I going to do? Yeah. And if we can turn that around, and I always say, even if you're just smiling at someone today, you don't know. You don't know if you might have been the only person that smiled at them in a week.
Yeah.
They might have been walking to jump off, I don't know, a bridge or something. Yeah. And just the fact that someone cares. And so, it's that, that wind that hits the bridge. Remember that? And the resonance.
Yes.
We can create a resonance.
Yes.
Exactly.
And I think it's starting to happen now. There's an awakening that's happening.
I think so.
Yes.
I think so.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.